Welcome to the Established Podcast. Conversations with founders, investors, and changemakers shaping the future. Each episode uncovers the stories and lessons driving today's innovation economy. Powered by Established, we spark innovation and build connections that matter through strategy, storytelling, events, community building, investment programs, and more. Now, let's dive in.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Established Podcast. I'm Frank Gruber, your host, the co-CEO of Established, as well as managing partner over at Established Ventures, where we're looking for interesting startups and investing in those as we see them. Today, I've got two special guests, Grant Rogers. He's the CEO of Maven Scouts, as well as Grind Ventures, as well as Holly Burrow. She's also the CEO of a company called EQALL Business Solutions, and it's spelled EQALL, so equal. And Grant and Holly were interviewed by Jamila Corbett over at the Established Network for the monthly Innovation Circle, which we host every third Thursday of the month. So you can go check those out. You can join it by going to Established or learning more over there, or going to est.us/the-mic2026. Again, it's est.us, the-mic2026. The mic is actually part of Established Network, which is a project we started to better connect thousands of entrepreneurs, investors, and thought leaders that have been part of our network. You can go learn more about that over at established.network. All right, that's a lot to say very quickly, but without further ado, I want to get you right into that interview with Grant Rogers and Holly Burrow. So let's jump right in.
How y'all doing?
Doing great. Glad to be here. Thank you for having us.
Yes, of course. And Grant he'll be in and out of the stream, but we're going to make it do what it do. We'll start with you, Holly, while we wait for Grant's return. So, Holly, from your vantage point, working with ESOs in different municipalities across the country, what are ecosystems still getting wrong when it comes to truly supporting our founders?
What they're getting wrong is really, really simple. They're not talking to each other. What we see again and again is beautiful, beautiful plans. And to your point earlier, they are built in parallel. They are not built together. And so there's no communication between organizations of what is happening with different founders that are doing different things. There's no communication about programs that are being accessed or capital that's being accessed. And so things are being replicated and duplicated in ways that are not necessarily productive, well-intentioned, but not always productive.
Yeah. And Grant, I see that you're back with us. Can you hear us? Okay. Nope. Grant still is unable to hear us. All right.
I can hear you.
Oh, there you go. Hi, Grant.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna pivot to you really quickly. We've started the conversation around ecosystems, but from your vantage point, Grant, across founders and investors, because that seems to be your sweet spot, what are the early warning signs that an ecosystem is more disconnected than it actually appears on the surface?
Yeah. So what comes up for me is the founders asking for funding without fully thinking out their business model or how they want to take their product to market. We see that a lot across the entrepreneur ecosystem, and then a lot in Louisiana. Hence why we have the 15-week MavenWorks accelerator.
Yeah, and with the MavenWorks Accelerator, you've actually been able to partner with other ESOs, right, or other people to help forward this mission.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're an emerging cluster here, and I think a lot of people who are visionaries have a good idea, as far as with the new meta center coming in and wanting to create this technology ecosystem across the I-20 corridor in northern Louisiana. And I have to just remind them, we've been doing this for nearly a decade, and it's constant iteration, right? So you're constantly iterating. You're not really ever pivoting. But we created a kind of a blanket here that we're still sewing together, using that connective tissue between ESOs to support those entrepreneurs, because really they don't have the guardrails that they need if they're just reliant on the SBDC or government.
Yeah, and I want to follow on. I like to follow on to that. How have you been able to create that connective tissue between organizations to collaborate to help the founders?
Yeah, it's really expectation management and managing our weekly cycles that we run. Most founders aren't used to doing 45-minute stand-ups weekly, and then being tasked with homework and running that gear. They're not used to that, so they go into I call it the spring training before we present them to go into the show to perform. And then all founders are looking for capital. And then all big businesses, we did a survey on them, corporate 100 to 500 companies, and they're also looking for capital. So it's not always what meets the eye. Just because you're, a solopreneur or a Fortune 500 company, you still have that human element that takes place. And so we just meet the humans where they're at. Meet the founders, where they're at, and try and understand, what they're outside of funding, what their need is, and what's novel about what they're doing.
Yeah, and meet the people where they're at. I like that. And this question is for the group. Where are we seeing this disconnect within the ecosystem show up more clearly, or show up the most? Is it in the founder experience? Is it in funding, programming, or relationships between organizations? And Holly or Grant? Let's start with Holly first.
I think there's a lot of problems with marketing, which sounds really simple. I think a lot of programs don't do a great job of making sure that their partners and their participants actually understand what it is and what it's meant to accomplish. And to Grant's point, every business owner says they need capital, but the process of determining what they actually need is a little bit more in depth than that. And I don't think that there's a lot of communication between organizations within an ecosystem of what that journey needs to look like.
Yeah. And Grant, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's the way we were raised. $1 million seems to be the theme. If I just had $1 million, well, if you just had $1 million, you wouldn't know what to do with it because you don't have a model, right? So I don't blame the entrepreneur. I blame how we were generationally raised, and we have to change that mindset, and get back to. Can y'all still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We have to get.
Okay.
He spoke himself out of existence.
I'm sure Grant will be back. We'll go ahead and keep we'll keep the conversation going. And Holly, what have you seen? Because you've been at this for quite some time now. And what has changed over the last couple of years when it comes to,
can you hear me now?
Ecosystems? Yeah. I'm chatting with Holly right now, but we can't hear you, Grant. Yeah, what's changed in the last couple of years when it comes to ecosystems that makes collaboration just more critical or more fragile?
I think there seems to be a bit more awareness of ecosystems. That sounds really basic, but there seems to be an emerging awareness that not only do they exist, but you must foster them, and you must care for them and feed them and make sure that they are intentionally created, because they will exist whether you intentionally create and care for them or not. And so I think there is a growing awareness of that need. And I think that's changing a lot of the vernacular around it. I think that's changing a lot of the activism around it. And it's also changing funding models, because we're seeing more funders be interested in collaborative efforts than we have in the past.
Yeah. And did you know that a couple years ago, this was maybe 2022, I had a robust conversation with someone who was like, ecosystems aren't real. I kid you not. The person really said this. It's because it's not something that's tangible. Like, what is an ecosystem? It's new it's new, but not new. The term is newly coined, but the infrastructure, the way it works has always been there. I think over the last decade or so, we're now getting a little bit more intentional with how we're cultivating ecosystems, whether you're in rural or you're in a tech hub. But it's not anything new, because again, they were like their whole idea was, well, in order for you to have an ecosystem, you have to have investors on deck. You have to have this infrastructure in place, this infrastructure. And they came from a VC background. So they're very structured in the way they're thinking. And I'm like, well, we're still developing the rules, like what the ecosystem building rules as ecosystem practitioners. And you're part of that, Holly. So you've seen this.
One thing that I think is real, I just want to like say this because it's not my words. Andy Stoll always calls it, and he runs eShip Alliance. And something he calls it is measuring hugs, because it's this sort of like ephemeral thing that equals ecosystem. So it's really hard to drive data around ecosystems. And that's one of the biggest problems, is that
that's what it is.
It's extremely hard to measure. How do you measure, oh, I met someone 3 years ago, we now have a multi-million-dollar contract together, and that happened because the ecosystem existed? How do you measure that? It's a very difficult thing to measure.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. It's difficult to explain because it's hard to measure, even though it does exist. And Grant, welcome back. Can you hear us? Okay.
I can. I apologize. I had a phone call come in. I canceled it, and you guys couldn't hear me. So
no worries. No worries.
Yeah.
So, question for you, Grant. Question for you, since you're back. What do you think? Because you've had a lot of partnerships and you've cultivated a lot of partnerships just in what you're doing. What is one assumption people make about partnerships that you've learned is rarely true when it comes to ecosystem building?
Just because you met and have a logo on a website doesn't make you partners.
Wow. So what does make you a partner? That's my next question.
Exchanging revenue and understanding each other's mission and understanding your right and left limits. And so if you can rely on partners to do that, right, it creates a supply and demand, and you can create a movement that way. But the folks that put logos on websites and then, use that as leverage, that's not an ecosystem, nor is a partnership.
Okay.
And you've got a lot of people that do that. Again, that's why the ESOs exist, so we can educate them and be, holistically disruptive. As change agents, and ESOs, as an ESO, this is a cluster, right? We've got a bank involved. We got a marketing company involved. We've got our VC arm involved. We have an accelerator involved. We have, Army DevCom involved. We have AFWorks involved. We have all of these folks, one of the founders of AFWorks involved. So that to me is an organic ecosystem that can move anywhere, right, from a human aspect and go into a small town, rent out a space, and then host an event. To me, that's ecosystem building, because you brought something to that area that is never seen it before. However, there's nothing new under the sun. And historically, if you look at World War II, I'm speaking in that military vein. If you look at World War II, Louisiana and these other, states stood up, based off of land and training and military bases. They stood up these universities, right? A lot of the universities were founded off of World War II and military applications. And, we all while we support, Main Street entrepreneurs, referring them to SBDCs, etc., we want to unearth that those dual use capabilities while we're doing ecosystem building.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Grant. And you bring up an interesting point. And I want to pivot to Holly, because Holly actually deals with Main Street entrepreneurs, right? And Grant was talking about the collaboration between the universities and the private partners, and they can take this group of people, this ecosystem, and kind of go anywhere. So when collaboration is designed or poorly designed, not saying your collaboration is poorly designed, but it led me to this question. When a collaboration is poorly designed and you take these group of people and place it over here, who gets left out first in these type of ecosystem building activities, Holly?
That's an interesting question. What we see often is that the Main Street businesses and the location-based businesses really are the fabric of the community. And so when you're very, very intentional about building an ecosystem that includes them, you're creating an environment for the company that you're building. If you're a higher tech or a higher growth company, you're creating the community and the fabric behind it. And so the level of intentionality, when you wrap the things together and you weave them together, you end up with a place that not only is growing innovation and growing business, but is growing a community and a place that people want to be, because that, in our experience, is something that has gotten lost in the sauce as we have focused more and more on growing, specifically innovation-based businesses. Is the community where people live is actually quite important. And if you don't intentionally weave that into what that ecosystem looks like, it really gets lost, and you end up with mismatched resources, and you end up with business owners that don't know where to go for help. And so we end up with high growth businesses that are reaching out to small business facing and Main Street facing things because it's all very confusing to them. So I think if you build intentionality into it, it changes what that journey looks like for everyone, and you weave a better fabric for the community.
Yeah, that's good. And how do you build more intentionality into it? That's a follow-up question to what you just said.
Sure. I think it's mapping it out and consistently mapping it out. Like that's it. And that's not a one-time thing. It's a constantly iterative effort of who's doing what, how are they doing it, where can we direct people, how are we directing them? Because a lot of what we've seen where the problem arises is connections get antiquated really quickly. So if you've propped up a program that is really, really specific and that program ends up making a shift because they need to serve a different audience, their funder changed, whatever that might look like, if you're not communicating to the rest of the ecosystem what that change looks and feels like, you end up with accidental misalignment and people fall off. People fall out of the ecosystem because they become quickly frustrated with not landing in the resources that they need.
And Grant, you sit at the intersection of founders and scouts, investors. When ESOs aren't talking to each other, how does that friction show up in the deal flow or the trust gap for investors?
Yeah, so I want to go back real quick to my statement. That's very specific to the dual use ecosystem. And that's why we partnered with Louisiana Catalyst, because they run a Main Street accelerator, right? And so due to our gravity, it attracts a lot of Main Street. And so let's say that, one does a catering business. Well, we'll have them, sponsor the next event, so that we can give them advertisement, and then we'll use, dollars from Fed or state to purchase, plate lunches from that local business in that community. And then we go a step further, and whatever plate lunches aren't eaten, we'll go and donate to, say, the Salvation Army or other nonprofits, to give back. So that to me is a win. And what I find a lot of times, it goes back to that funding thing. It's like, well, it's really meeting them where they're at, the founders, because they may go to what is in their ecosystem and, in Southern Louisiana, and what they really need is to come up to Northern Louisiana, right? Because we have something that Southern Louisiana doesn't have. So, but if we're not communicating with the other ESOs, investors in Southern Louisiana, then that creates a gap, and then the founders fall in it every time, throw their hands up and say, this isn't for me. So it's really understanding the founder, understanding their business model and their technology, so that you can point them in the right direction so that they can be served.
And thank you.
If we don't have those good relationships and that connection and being intentional, then we cannot. I'm saying one thing and another ESO or investor is saying another. That really causes confusion for the founder.
Yeah, and I want to pull on that thread a little bit more, and let's talk about partnerships that actually work, because Grant, you've been able to cultivate some deep partnerships down where you are in your particular ecosystem. So can you give us a specific example or specific ecosystem partnership you are or were directly involved in, and how it all actually worked out?
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, I can talk to you about the relationship with Boot 64. They're a syndicate partner of Grind Ventures, and they have a bigger fund. They referred us to VC Lab. We graduated that almost 2 years ago now. And so for every deal that comes through, once they get finished with the accelerator, we send them over to Boot 64, because Boot 64 invests in Main Street and dual use technologies, whereas Grind Ventures only invest in dual use. So when the accelerator, each time it kicks off, we do a quarterly accelerator, and before that we do what's called a collider. So we'll invite Boot 64 to start engaging and building those relationships with the founders. And what came to fruition recently was we had a contract with Future Use of Energy in Louisiana, Fuel, which is an NSF. It's a part of the NSF grant that was awarded in Baton Rouge. And we were charged to go and find veterans that were licensing IP. And so at the very end of the accelerator, we had what was called a fuel tank, and they all pitched their dual use IP that they've licensed from either the Department of War or University of Louisiana Lafayette. And then Boot 64, Academia, Fuel, Grind Ventures, we're all there. Opportunity Machine, which is another is an incubator and ESO in Lafayette. They were all there as judges, and they were able to see the product of the accelerator right there in real life. So without those relationships, I would say it'd be very siloed, right? Because there's a lot in Louisiana and other states, they don't understand this ESO acronym. They don't understand, venture capital. They don't understand dual use. They don't understand, how that activity can go into a Main Street business, sit down and enjoy a nice hamburger, right? So I hope that answers the question, but that is the quilt that we're sewing here in Louisiana. We even did a roads innovation where we would go ahead and do some scout recon of the area, film it, and then publicize it on LinkedIn to talk about that area, mainly manufacturing. We did the Lab to Market, GAFC award, and advertised it that way.
Yeah, thank you for that, Grant. And it seems like you're weaving together Main Street entrepreneurship and the high tech entrepreneurs down in the Louisiana ecosystem. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, you did.
And Holly, same question. Would love to learn about a specific partnership you were directly involved in, whether it was in front of the scenes or behind the scenes, that actually worked.
Well, I think I'll first start by talking about one we're currently building, because it's a really interesting one. So we are building a small business empowerment hub for the township of Upper Darby, right outside of Philadelphia. And what's really cool about that one is it is a space that doesn't have any existing partnerships for supporting entrepreneurs at all. And so as we're kicking off what this journey looks like, we're being incredibly intentional about bringing in all of the CDFIs and all of the different organizations that sort of surround that community and bringing them in, because we feel like our position is not to create solutions, but create access to solutions. And so that's how we're kind of approaching that. And the reason that we're approaching it that way is from previous experience building ecosystems in spaces. Like we've been recently working in Durham. And some of the work that we've been doing in Durham has been really intentional about connecting the county resources to small businesses and organizations that are serving small businesses within that community. And it's been a really interesting journey understanding all of the different ESOs that operate within that ecosystem and helping them learn how to communicate with each other, to help them better understand how do we not duplicate efforts, how do we roll up data correctly, how do we understand how to go after funding together. Because as I mentioned previously, like we're seeing more and more funders looking for partnership organizations. And so I think that's the one that I would point to as the most recent thing that we've done successfully and been a part of, is figuring out how do we get all of these ESOs to better understand what it means to align and push entrepreneurs through a system, because every single ESO, just to Grant's point as well, you all do different things. And so if you understand exactly what every organization is doing, you can be very, very intentional about making sure that the entrepreneurs understand how to navigate.
Yeah, and I want to dig a little bit deeper, Holly, if I can. Because you're a systems level thinker, and when you are structuring those partnerships between the ESOs to help the entrepreneur, to help the founder, to help the innovator, but those ESOs have different missions, how do you define success so that all the ESOs stay aligned without losing their individual secret sauce, their identity?
Well, now we're back to measuring hugs. I mean, it's really for us, one of the things that we are baking into the metric systems that we're building for them for reporting and data collection is actually shared like success stories. So if two ESOs both support an entrepreneur and that entrepreneur wins a large contract or does something of that nature, and they both are publicly sharing that they have been a part of this entrepreneur's journey, and they kind of tag each other into it, and they're both a part of it, like that's one of our success metrics, is like shared journey. Because what we find is that that's what's happening, is it's a scarcity mindset that starts to exist. And if you can help retrain the ecosystem to understand that they're doing this together, and the more often that you are communicating about it and are co-sharing it, it's bigger wins overall. And so for us, that's a huge element of it, is trying to help the ecosystem itself understand how to create those junctions together and how to do it intentionally, because it's happening whether they mean it to or not. But they need to learn how to share it, and they need to learn how to document it, because back to the point of like, it's very, very hard to measure ecosystem growth and ecosystem impact. And if you want things to be funded, you must measure them. And so we have to figure out what are some of the ways that we can help them to measure once we're gone and we're no longer there to help support the journey. How can they measure what that looks like? So for us, that's a big element.
I like that you said that about basically sharing the data, coming up with the structure so that everyone wins when it comes to data reporting. And I know some ESOs, they covet these vanity metrics because it'll help them win awards. We're going to put a pin in that though, because I want to dive deep into that. But before we dive deep, I'm curious to know, Grant, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, then we're going to come back and take that pin out of that. Grant, you scale trust-based networks across regions down there where you are. How do you move a partnership? Because we talked about it a little bit earlier, like what makes a partner. So how do you move a partnership from a referral on a spreadsheet to a functional network where the ESOs are actually sharing those high-quality leads and resources?
I'm gonna keep it simple. I find the helpers, I find the doers, and I build trust. That's how you do it.
And okay, let's pull on that thread just a little bit more. If I could get a little deeper, we're going,
okay.
Give me the shovel. What is governance? What does the governance of a trust-based network look like? Is it a contract? Is it a culture? What does that look like?
Yeah. Without it being, what's in it for me, theme for, and I say that, they use that in sales, acronym WAFM, what's in it for me. People want to be seen, so I create that platform so that people can be seen and they can be heard. And even though, let's say I have a contract, I don't make it about me. I make it about them, and I make it about the ecosystem. And I say, this is our event. This is your event. This is your ecosystem just as much as it is mine, because, I've got to go and eat at the same restaurant that they do. I've got to go and get the same gas, drive down the same road, right? And so you take that culture and you start splashing it, into different ecosystems. You can really build something special. And then comes the governance, right? I don't believe you can start with the governance and say, well, this is our party, go home, you're not welcome here. No, you survey, and you people that want to be there, they're going to come. I think over the past 2 years, we've cultivated over 800 net new contacts. between Main Street, researchers, investors, engineers, manufacturers, consultants. And the consultants are a big one, right? I take consultants and I'm like, hey, you're my dot connector now. I need you to get X amount of people here. Bring your network. And so then, you've got a network of networks within that room. And then people are like, I've never been to an event like this, right? I've never been in a room like this. And, I take some reflection notes and, digest it. And I'm like, that's because it's organic and it's honest and there's connection here and people can get a word in without someone pushing a narrative on stage. Right. So that for me works. That may not work everywhere. But I think and I'll end it with this. I think people who have made money or people who have a title next to their name really forget where they came from. And there needs to be a mentorship renaissance that, reaches down into the generations to come, because guess what? They adopted cell phones and all this other stuff. When they were kids, and now they're adults and they're way more advanced than, the 60 or 70-year-olds who have quote unquote made it. And so I think that's a topic that not a lot of people are talking about. And I think that could be a disruptive in nature in a good way, versus creating a large gap there. So trying to cultivate that as well, because I promise you this younger generation, to include mine, I'm 37, has something that this older generation needs. It's not that we want to change anything. We want to improve upon what already exists. So I would say that all of that, into one bag, you put all that in there, and that's what works for us, because this is, I'll go back to, we're constantly iterating. You're never going to solve innovation. It's ongoing always.
Yeah, thank you. And what I gather from everything that you just said is relationships matter. And when those relationships are cultivated, that's how you create the governance, the structure. You have this culture of building together, building those deep relationships, and then the rules, the structure of that comes.
Yeah. And one last thing, if you don't mind, a lot of people are boomeranging back to where they grew up. And so they're able to go to Dallas and then move back, right? Or they're able to go to Philadelphia and move back wherever they're from, or Miami or wherever, because they now have been trained essentially from that ecosystem. Now they're bringing some of that flavor to an ecosystem that doesn't necessarily have what those bigger ecosystems might. So I think that's important too, and understanding the stats on boomerang culture and people coming back to where they grew up.
You know what? That might make for an interesting conversation. Thank you, Grant. Okay, I'm going to switch gears here because I want to take that pin out of what we pinned before in the conversation with you, Holly, in that question before. And I want to move to the more tactical operational side of things and talk about how the metrics and sharing data and ESOs often compete for the same pool of grant funding. We know this. It's this many ESOs and this much money.
Yes,
and you get it. Yeah, I know we've all seen the solicitations. And in some cases, having those big network of founders and collaborators can be a benefit, even if the relationship isn't itself beneficial, because think again, vanity metrics. I'm going to pull on that thread and dig a little deeper. How do we restructure incentives so that an ESO is actually rewarded for passing a founder or even another organization to a better fit partner? I think you kind of hinted at that, Holly, and I want to start with you.
So that is right at the core of the thing that I am sort of semi-obsessed with at the moment, is how do we figure that out? How do we incentivize actually creating pathways between I've been having a lot of really great conversations with EcoMap because they are at the core of what an ecosystem looks like. And they've been trying to develop some really, really novel things around what it looks like to track the interaction of entrepreneurs through an ecosystem. And some of the conversations that have emerged out of that are things around how do we intentionally track, if let's say an entrepreneur is early stage, they have their idea, they're not very far along the journey, they give $5,000 in a small scale pitch competition, it's just seed money, figure out, can we do this or not? One thing that's not generally being tracked is what are they doing with that money? Did that money exponentiate in any way? Because oftentimes it can if it's handled correctly. And how are we actually tracking the investment in that entrepreneur at an ecosystem level? So what we've been doing is tracking them at a micro level for each organization. But what may have happened, and we've watched it because we have a really strange vantage point because we might be in a community, but at multiple ESOs within a community. And we can see an entrepreneur that's bopping in between organizations and support because there's funding floating at the different locations. And so they're going and they're collecting all these things into their Easter egg basket, basically, but nobody is tracking the collective number. And so I think that all roads always lead back to money. So can you figure out how to incentivize? Are we all helping the entrepreneurs continue to collect capital to get to where they need to be? Or are we just piecemealing it and nobody knows, like, have they gotten $5,000 or $500,000? Nobody really knows. And currently that's one of the problems that we acutely see is how effective is an ecosystem being at tracking and doling out the funding that they're able to do? Because a lot of the programs come with funding incentives that are doled out to the entrepreneurs, but nobody's really tracking collectively what's happening. So that's one of the things that we personally are very interested in figuring out how to track. Not that that's easy. I'm just going to be really clear about that. It's like, as we have started walking down this pathway and trying to figure out with communities, how might we track this? It's incredibly difficult because it happens to be data that nobody wants to turn over. And it's weird. It's just sort of a weird, sensitive thing that nobody wants to talk about.
Yeah. And yes, it is. And that's why, again, I'm asking you all, because this is something that's really, we don't have the answer to it yet. We're trying to figure it out ourselves. And what's the right level of data sharing to support founders without creating the friction or mistrust amongst ESOs? And Grant, do you have any, would you like to weigh in on that, on a possible answer?
Yeah. I don't think a lot of people have been doing ESO activity long enough to understand how to measure their data. I think you get a lot of people that start off, have an idea, can put it in ChatGPT and propose, and they win, and they get monies and they're like, I have no idea what to do with this. I don't know how to report my metrics. I don't know how to build an ecosystem, right? I don't know how to share the quantitative and qualitative data to make it make sense. So I'll kind of walk you through what we did. When we got our first GAFC award, we took those monies and sprinkled them out in different, we were surveying, and it worked, right? What we went out and did, the colliders worked, which we had already done a collider before. Been doing those for about a decade. And then we started to cultivate, different entrepreneurs in different workshops, and we're like, oh, this is great. Well, then let's add a partner to it for our next GAFC proposal, right? And so we did a knowledge exchange. And so we just grew what we originally proposed. And now we're doing capital stacks, right? And so if someone comes along and says, hey, I want to do this, and they have my vision and or my idea, what I say is, well, what value do you bring? What business model do you have? And would you like to partner with us and become a part of the ecosystem in which has already been created? And I think a lot of people in ESOs don't understand the data and the metrics and, the numbers, so to speak. I think they want to I even think that there's, a lot of people that are fluffing the numbers, and don't know, again, how to quantify and qualify their metrics. So I think, understanding the initiatives of the contract, grantor, and understanding what, the United States, what the SBA really wants. I think starting there and then working your plan against that, or tailored to that, and then reporting in and then waiting for the feedback. But I think a lot of people out there that propose, they get, limited amount of dollars, and then they burn it up and they're like, hey, I need more because I was just right there. They're doing stuff that founders do. It's no different. So again, I think the more mature, ESOs like what Holly and I have, it's our responsibility to educate those other ESOs that are just getting started, so as to help them and then bring them, onto our army here. And hopefully what I see is, I don't know, 5 years from now, if this keeps going, we connect the entire United States and there's a blanket of ESOs, across the United States, working with SSBCI funds, SBOP awardees, GAFC awardees, RIC awardees. We really need that. So it's a big quilt that's being built in these micro ecosystems. And then the macro ecosystem is that of the United States. It just may taste a little different if you cross a line into another state, especially if you go from Louisiana to Texas, right? The gumbo is definitely going to be different. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Well, I want to bounce off of that ever so slightly and say that I think some of the problem actually comes from the funding resources, because some of the data that gets asked to be collected for those purposes doesn't always tell the story that it needs to tell. It's become practice, and it's not necessarily so, to the point that, like, there are a lot of ESOs that are longstanding that we end up partnering with to support, and they've been collecting deep data for 20 years, but the data that they've been collecting isn't necessarily telling the story of any progress, because the data that they've been collecting is what's been connected only to what the funding is. And so they have missed opportunities to tell bigger, larger stories of success and growth, because they were hyper focused only on pleasing their funders. And then ultimately the funders want the whole story, but they don't always know how to ask for it. And so there's this sort of misaligned, like, they ask for some data, but they don't know what all they need to ask for. And then the organizations are trying to make sure they stay funded. So then they only give the data they were asked for. And it's just this cycle that keeps repeating. And it's a strange problem, because everybody's trying to do the right thing. So it's a very strange problem.
Yeah, thank you, Holly, for weighing in on that. And I can agree that sometimes the data that's being asked of the ESOs doesn't quite fit what the work that's actually being done. So then the question becomes, how do you collect the qualitative data and quantitative data at the same time, and how do you weigh both of those? But listen, we're running out of time. We could talk about this all day, all night, into next week. I want to do a quick fire round of start, stop, continue. So we're going to go with Grant first. Start, stop, continue. If you were advising, and Holly, I'm going to switch to you, same question. If you were advising an ESO listening today, what is one thing they should stop doing immediately to be a better partner, to be a better ESO, and one thing they should start doing next week or continue doing?
Look yourself in the mirror and ask what value you add, and then reach out to Holly and I.
Holly, what about you?
Stop being reactive and start being strategic is my, that's because so many are reactive.
All right. With that said, we are going to wrap it up. Thank you so much, Holly and Grant, for this conversation. Really appreciate it, and appreciate both of your insights.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thank
for
you guys for having
me.
us. Hey, and Holly, so I just reflected, right? And I bring value, and now I want to reach out to you. So
All right, do it.
we got to connect.
I love
Make it
this. I
happen.
love it. Connections right here on the stage. That's what happens when you come on the mic. All right, y'all.
Thank you so much, Jamila and Grant and Holly. Great stuff as always. Always interesting over at the mic. So definitely check that out again. It's est.us/the mic 2026. You're not going to want to miss one of these. It's every third Thursday, and you can become a part of that program at Established Network. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. For those who are out there trying to change the world, do interesting things, bring their creative idea to life, there's no better time than today to start up, and we can help you on your journey. Simply join our Established Network over at established.network. And you're already doing something right by listening to this podcast. And hopefully it was helpful and you learned something interesting, and it'll take your idea or endeavor to the next level. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. I'm Frank Gruber. Until next time, everyone be safe out there. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Established Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a review in the App Store, and share the show with friends, colleagues, and on social. Together, we can help more innovators become established. We'll be back with another conversation soon.